So this weekend we have the return of Vasiliy Lomachenko. He'll be squaring off against Jamaine Ortiz. So I have to be honest, people, when this fight was announced, I was kind of thinking, huh? Jamaine Ortiz, who's that? Obviously, since then I've tried to do my homework, but granted, I have to be honest, I haven't really seen that much of Ortiz. I've watched his most recent and most significant fight. That was back in May against Jamel Herring. I also checked out one of his earlier fights, which was from April 2021, and that was against one Joseph Adorno, who, once again, a fighter I'd never heard of. And now, I think this has the potential to be an interesting fight. Personally, it wasn't the fight that I would have wanted, but then I guess you have to factor in who was a realistic opponent for Vasiliy Lomachenko to come back against. It has actually been nearly a year since Lomachenko last fought. He last fought in December of 2021 against Richard Comey. Before that was June of 2021 against Masayoshi Nakatani. As I say, Jamaine Ortiz, his last fight was in May of this year against Jamel Herring. So to give you my assessment of Jamaine Ortiz, as I say, I haven't seen too much of him, but I feel like I've seen his most significant fights. Jamel Herring was his most well-known and highly accomplished opponent. But also this Joseph Adorno fight was interesting because I checked on BoxRec and I saw that Ortiz was actually knocked down in round 2 and round 7. So I thought, that's probably quite telling. So let me check this fight out. And yeah, granted, it was a year and a half ago. And as a young fighter, Jamaine Ortiz, 16-0-1 is his record. He's 26 years old. You have to imagine that he's still on the learning curve. Still learning his trade day in, day out, going through camps, developing his ability and whatnot. But in the Herring fight, I was thinking, I see the talent, the athleticism, but there's something that's just not fully there. And then I checked out the Joseph Adorno fight and I started to see it. So for those who've never seen Ortiz before, he's a fairly big guy for the weight. He's like 5'8". He's got decent reach, quite athletic. He's listed as an orthodox, but he actually switches. And he does so with a decent amount of proficiency. Switch hitting is not the easiest thing. It's becoming more common, but it still requires some skill and some practice. He's actually a decent switch hitter, as I say. But he has a load of tools. He's quite athletic. He's got very good balance and he's got a very good construct and stance that he fights out of. Decent shot selection and punches in terms of his technique on the shots. He's not like a real puncher, I don't think. His record doesn't suggest that. Out of 16 wins, he's got 8 KOs. But even if you look at his punch technique, you can see he could get a bit more out of it. He's not the heaviest handed guy who doesn't really know how to really rip his weight through a target, but he's a good all-rounder. But then I'm looking at the tactical perspective, the boxing IQ, how he applies his technique, and I think it's fair to say, in my opinion, it leaves a little bit to be desired, especially when he's going to be making quite a considerable jump up in competition to fight the likes of Lomachenko, who, yes, is the smaller man. Lomachenko is not a big lightweight, but he is tremendously skilled. Very technical, probably one of the most technically complete fighters you'll find today. But Ortiz, he has these flashy outbursts because he can throw punches, he throw jabs, right hands, hooks, uppercuts, body shots. But the setup isn't great. He sometimes displays some good timing, particularly with the jab and sometimes the right hand. But when it's often you'll see Ortiz, and he's not really doing much at long range. He's kind of standing off and against an opponent. But his guard, his active guard isn't the most consistent. I don't think he really knows how to sell his feints much. There seems to just be a lack of setup when it comes to his offense. And it's a shame because when he lets his hands go, he can be quite impressive. But it just seems bridging that gap, especially from long range, It's not Ortiz's strong point. Oftentimes he'll kind of have this attempt at an active guard. It's like, okay, you can see he's trying to give different looks, position himself around his opponent, see what he can find. And all of a sudden he'll just fly forward with these flurries and like large long punch combinations. Sometimes you'll see Jamaine Ortiz go for a triple, quadruple, quintuple jab, but there's no real intelligence. It's just like punch, 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 punch. Same thing with his combinations. Sometimes he'll fly forward and just look to land hooks and uppercuts, and every now and then they'll pay off and he'll catch his opponent off guard. Clearly have a big exchange where he comes off on top and it looks great in the judge's eyes, but there's the flip side to that where it doesn't always work out, and sometimes Ortiz is vulnerable to getting timed. And we saw this against Jamel Herring. Jamel Herring, a big, tall, lanky southpaw, massive for lightweight. Someone who was able to outreach and had a bit of a size advantage on Ortiz. And Herring was able to time him here and there, time him coming in. Herring, though, is he a puncher? Not really. 23 wins, only 11 KOs. I think the Carl Frampton win probably flattered Jamel Herring's punching power and finishing ability. So he wasn't really able to make Ortiz pay that much. However, when it came to this fight against Joseph Adorno, Ortiz was in some serious trouble because he's been timed early by Adorno. Most notably in the second round when Adorno timed him with a beautiful left hook as Jamaine Ortiz was looking to step in with his jab, easily timed, seriously hurt by Adorno. And then later on in that round, he was actually put down by another left hook. It was a bit more behind the ear, but it was still a legitimate punch. And then later in the fight, in round 7, Adorno managed to time Ortiz coming in once again, but this time with a left uppercut. And seriously, that was a very damaging punch. And it didn't knock Ortiz down fully, but it was only because the ropes held Ortiz up. He looked out of it. He looked completely dazed because his head was hanging through the ropes, and the ropes were the only thing suspending him above the canvas. And so Ortiz, flashy, athletic, decent construct, but easy to time on the way in, I think. And not the most active at long range, especially at close range. Ortiz is actually a bit more impressive because he understands how to use an arm, shoulder and an elbow to block an opponent's hands, pin their gloves to their face or their body, and then use some shots from there, mixing the lighter shots to set something bigger up. He's a bit more impressive up close. Vasiliy Lomachenko, though, is a very wily, slippery veteran. We know that he's very, very technically skilled. And I kind of see this fight as the old grandmaster in Vasiliy Lomachenko versus the young, athletic, energetic, but slightly green prospect in Jamaine Ortiz. And I have to really be frank, I'd be surprised if Ortiz won this fight. Does he have the ingredients? Does he have the potential to? I suppose so. He's a big guy, athletic, not the biggest puncher, but he's got some assertiveness on his shots, going up against an aging Lomachenko, 34 years old, quite small at the weight, hasn't fought in nearly a year. But, it's after seeing how Lomachenko dealt with Comey, who I rate as a much better technician than Ortiz, maybe not as sharp and explosive an athlete, but a good athlete in his own right. I expect Lomachenko to win this fight and win it pretty handily, to be honest. So how do I see this fight going? I think Lomachenko is probably going to take his time in the early rounds because he's going to have a big guy in front of him, a big athletic guy, and he's maybe just going to want to move around, maybe give some different looks as we see him do, see how Jamaine Ortiz reacts to the feints, because that's an important point to note about this fight, is Lomachenko and Ortiz are sparring partners, they're former sparring partners, so you have to imagine there's going to be some familiarity there. Who is going to benefit more from that familiarity? I suspect it may be Lomachenko, because I believe that I mean, I'm sure that Lomachenko brought Ortiz in as a sparring partner. So I imagine that before he brought Ortiz in, he was probably already scoping him out a little bit. Is this guy the right guy to bring for sparring? Is he maybe a bit too dangerous? If we give him this experience, will he be able to use it later on down the line when we potentially fight? So I suspect that this fight has probably come about because Lomachenko is happy to take this fight leading into maybe a bigger fight in early 2023. So I suspect that he's probably benefited more from that sparring with Ortiz. But then again, I could be wrong. Ortiz could be a precocious talent, and that spar or those spars with Lomachenko is all he needs to dethrone Lomachenko. Time will tell. But for the most part, from a technical point of view, what I've seen from Ortiz, I don't think he's going to be able to keep up with Lomachenko. His best bet is probably to use his physicality. I think the longer he stays at long range, the more Lomachenko is going to be able to work off of him and then get into close range and really start to shut Ortiz out. So if I'm guiding Ortiz, I tell him, be as active as you can at long range, but at the same time, be physical. Don't have it in mind to stay at long range as long as you can. Even though you're the bigger man, look to force Lomachenko, be physical with Lomachenko, intimidate him as best as you can to get him up against the ropes, to get him into a place where he has no choice but to defend. And then from there, you can use your slightly better inside fighting skills to try and rough up the smaller man. But that being said, I think that's easier said than done. I mean, it's always easier said than done when it comes to boxing. But Ortiz doesn't have the same physical prowess, the same power, and for my money, the same technique and IQ as someone like Teofimo Lopez. We saw Lopez have a good degree of success against Lomachenko because he was able to intimidate him with the power, because he was able to time him, and because he just had a better application of his technique, and his technique was better. Ortiz, I think, is, even though he's slightly bigger than Lopez, I think he's a lesser fighter, and I think that will show in this fight, because after a few rounds, I do see Lomachenko getting comfortable, getting into a rhythm, and really starting to piece up Ortiz, who, in that fight against Joseph Adorno, showed he has a fighting heart, because he was hurt early, he was hurt late, but he never showed any signs of giving up. He was always getting stuck in, always ready to clear his head, get some space, and then go again to get it back. So he's no slouch, and he's no chicken, he's no softy. This is someone who has a real fighting heart and probably has a lot of passion for boxing. However, I still think he's green. I think this fight's come too early, and I just don't think that he has most importantly, the technical ability to keep up with Lomachenko. So I see Ortiz being able to stick in there and take his licks like a man, but I think it's going to get to a point probably in round 9, round 10, around that kind of latter portion of the fight, where Ortiz's corner probably see that man taking a bit of a beating, maybe shipping quite a bit of punishment, and probably throwing in the towel. You know, they say, oh, we got a young fighter, he's taking a beating, let's save him so he can fight for another day. Yeah, I'm happy with that prediction. I think Lomachenko is going to win this fight sometime after round 9. I'm going to predict 10, 11. Yeah, between rounds 9 and 11. Ortiz's corner probably throwing the towel, and maybe Lomachenko secures the victory via stoppage and maybe moves on to bigger and better things in 2023. That's just my prediction. However, I could be completely wrong. If you agree, disagree, leave it down below. I'll get back to you. Let's see what happens come Saturday. But until then, people, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.